Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Dr. Jacqueline Liebsohn, author of Basic Counseling Responses. Dr. Jackie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, we are thrilled to have you. Are you ready to begin?
I'm good to go.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, the first thing I would say is, as I'm sitting here doing this interview, the first thing is that even though I'm a faculty member, a professor, I've been teaching for about 30 years, I still get kind of nervous doing these things. And I get nervous about doing a lot of different kinds of things. So the first piece of advice I'd go along with that piece is that kind of facing your fears. If you have a fear about something and you think you can't do it, then reminding yourself all the things that you've been able to do and facing it. So one of the fears that I had about doing this book was that this is a rewrite of a book that I wrote about 20 years ago with a co-author. And one of the fears I had was that I won't be able to do this on my own, or writing actually is quite a difficult process for me. I'm not a natural born writer, and I've come to learn that most people actually are not natural born writers, which I kind of thought they were. So I had this fear that, maybe that first book was because of my co-author, or just some of my own insecurities. And I just decided that I wanted to do this and that I could do it, and just face that fear, and decided I'd give it a try. And I guess that's one of my attitudes that I have, is about more like not focusing so much on the end goal, but focusing on what I can do. And I knew that I could sit down and work on it. And so I kind of started there, and I decided that I could do that. And so I started working on it, and even got to a point where I started doing some work with it while I was on sabbatical. And at one point, started getting close to September, when I had set my deadline that I wanted it to be published. And I got to that point and I hadn't really completed it the way I wanted to. And I hadn't looked into self-publishing, because originally the book was published by a very large educational publisher, and I had decided to go my own route. So anyway, I decided as we were getting very close to the deadline that I wanted it done for September, because I wanted to be able to use this book in a class that I teach. And I just had about 5 days before it really needed to be up there and ready for my students to be able to purchase it. And I realized, well, let's give it a go. Even though I didn't feel ready, I'm like, even if I have to stay up all night to finish this off, I know I can do it, and was able to push through and get it published and figure out how to do it, how to get it online, and self-publish. So I guess the first thing is really going through and not being afraid and just giving it a shot. The other thing I would say as well is that I do have an approach to writing, which is, especially if it's hard to sit down, especially with a blank page, that's the way it is for me. That's the hardest time to sit down to write, is when it's the blank page, is to just spend 30 minutes every single day writing. Or the way I know those people talk about writing for 30 minutes a day, but the way I look at it is more just spending time on my book 30 minutes a day. And that's sitting down, and even if I can't write anything, I'm sitting there for 30 minutes thinking about something, or taking notes, or doing an outline. And before you know it, and that's what happened to me, that happens to me when I write articles, when I write this book. I do have another book that I've written. Those things just, if you do that, you will put the time together and write a book. So it's pretty cool. So because again, it's a hard process for me. So if I think I'm going to sit down for a day and write, that's never going to work.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, one of the, as I was talking about that the first time I did get my book published, we did go through a large publishing house, and that was a different process than going through and doing the self-publishing. And so the first time around, uh, we started this book, Basic Counseling Responses, and came up with this idea and started writing the book before we even had the idea of publishing it. And we saw that with the literature that was out there and teaching this class of basic counseling skills to our students, there wasn't a book out there that we wanted, so we decided to write our own together. And by doing that, we came up with this plan and these 15 basic counseling responses and this new system of learning how to introduce communication responses to our students. And we just were copying those pages that we wrote and giving them to our students. And we thought, wow, this would be powerful for other people outside our program. The other thing is I was coming up for tenure and thought that it would certainly be helpful for me to have a book published in the tenure process. So we sent out the manuscript to a lot of publishers, and my co-author was encouraging to send to the more lower key and small publishing houses so we'd have more of a chance. And from my view, I thought, well, why don't we just send it everywhere and see where we get a bite? And so the only place that came back with interest in our book and publishing our book was the largest publishing company for educational literature, Cengage Publishers, and for textbook publishing and counseling. And so that worked out great. So again, that same theme of, taking that risk, believing in yourself and sending out to where you want to be published. If you're looking, so we did that and they published for 20 years and then they chose not to republish. And also the royalties were very small in comparison to the sales of the book. And so I decided that I would take it over, ask for the rights back, and republish and edit it and come out with a second edition that I would self-publish. And so that process turned out to be quite simple in a lot of ways. I, of course, started working on the book and changing things and creating what I wanted to create, and then decided to learn how to self-publish, and really did not take very long to get it up and published and out there, with the knowledge that I could always change it if I wanted to make some changes to the text, which I've already done. So I self-published in September, and I published for this class that I'm teaching in the fall, and was able to publish it. And during the process, decided that there were some things I wanted to change, make it more available to people outside of the counseling profession, wanted to make some changes. So I've already made a change to it, and the new version is up and running on Amazon. So I found that process super easy and fun to go through, and rewarding in that way.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Well, I knew that you were going to ask this question, and I was thinking, okay, I got to come up with some kind of marketing strategy, because actually I don't have one, and that's not my forte and my skill set. So that's going to be developing. My marketing strategy at this time, I'm a very practical person, and I wanted this book for my students. That was the first time I wrote the book, was for students in my program. And because I did have a publishing company, they marketed it. So it did go out to a lot of other universities and programs for counseling. This second time around, since it's just started and republished the book in September, I haven't engaged in that. One of the best marketing strategies, obviously, is that I did have an audience that would want my book and buy my book, being students in our program. And so the next step is going to be bringing that to the broader market. So to answer that question, again, that's part of my attitude, is you start going with it and then you start working on a marketing strategy. And so I guess today is probably the first part of a new marketing strategy, of talking with you and getting a podcast out there.
Now, are you looking to also do your own podcast, or are you talking about being a guest in other people's podcasts?
Well, I'm just saying, I got your invitation and I said yes, and decided that I would go for it. So right now it's your podcast. I do presentations. I do I haven't figured that out, but new opportunities, this came along and I need to kind of think through. I do have a website. I have things up on my website. So having a website, I also am a public speaker and going out and promoting this book because, again, this isn't a very specific arena, academic counseling programs. And I am also working on another text or a book that's going to be more for business and community around just communication responses and taking a similar model, but how we can use that within all aspects of our life. So haven't quite figured out the marketing aspect of all these things yet, but open to that.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
So favorite book, that is a tough question to answer. I do a lot of reading, fiction, a lot of fiction reading. I love downtime and reading books. I probably read about 2 fiction books a month. Um, not quite as big on the academic books. Certainly self-help books. I'm a psychologist. I have a private practice and I work with a lot of clients. But I'm going to go back to one book that really did impact me a long time ago, and it's called The Road Less Traveled. And that book, when I was first getting into, I've been a psychologist for 30 years, but when I started in the field and I read that book, it really gave me some perspective of different ways to live life, trusting within yourself and taking that path and finding that path that is for you and being able to not have to go down the same path as everybody else, but really finding your own truth and following that for yourself so that you can achieve whatever goals you have for yourself or just overall happiness.
And for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
And I knew you were going to ask this question as well, but I am not a quote person. Quotes can be fabulous and some people love quotes, but I don't. So I was like, okay, I'm going to answer this question, so I better go look up some quotes. But, since quotes aren't my thing in that way, but I do have sayings that I think are really important. And one aspect about myself, I'm in recovery. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I spent some time in 12-step meetings. And one thing that has always resonated for me in some ways is one day at a time. And that fits in very much with my own model of just looking at what you can accomplish and what you can do today and not getting ahead of yourself. And to help with the idea of, if I thought of, oh my God, I have to write a book this year, I would be too overwhelmed, but I could sit down and I could say, what can I do today? And I can spend a half hour today writing my book. And at the end of that, if you do those things consistently, you will, have a book at the end of a year. So I like taking things as they come and just being in that moment and being able to focus what is right now.
Well, Dr. Jackie, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
The best way to find me online is to go to JackieLiebsohn.com, and that's where you can find me. My last name is Leibsohn. And also, if you Google me, Jackie Liebsohn, you'll see some different things from my academic work and other aspects to be able to find me.
Well, Dr. Jackie, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.